Welcome back, slave narrative lovers like myself. We're still here with Harriet Jacobs, and this chapter is Scenes at the Plantation. And I'm going to just read part of this chapter because some of them can go on for a while. Early the next morning, I left my grandmother's with my youngest child. My boy was ill and I left him behind. I had many sad thoughts as the old wagon jolted on. Hitherto I had suffered alone. Now my little one was to be treated as a slave. As we drew near the great house, I thought of the time when I was formerly sent there out of revenge. I wondered for what purpose I was now sent. I could not tell. I resolved to obey orders as far as duty required, but within myself I determined to make my stay as short as possible. Mr. Flint was waiting to receive us. That's the son of the man that keeps the sexual predator, and told me, which is our enslaver, and told me to follow him upstairs to receive orders for the day. My little Ellen was left below in the kitchen. It was a change for her, who had always been so carefully tended. My young master said she might amuse herself in the yard. This was kind of him, since the child was hateful to his sight because he wanted to sleep with the mother. My task was to fit up the house for the reception of the bride. In the midst of sheets, cloth, tablecloths, towels, drapery, and carpeting, my head was as busy planning as were my fingers with the needle. At noon I was allowed to go to Ellen. She had sobbed herself to sleep. I heard Mr. Flint say to a neighbor, "I've got her down here and I'll soon take the town notions out of her head." My father is partly to blame for her nonsense. He ought to have broke her in long ago. See, talking about her as if she's an animal. The remark was made within my hearing, and it would have been quite as manly to have made it to my face. I love the fighting spirit. He had said things to me to my face which might or might not have surprised his neighbor if he had known of them. He was a chip off the old block. His father is a sexual predator, and so is he. I resolved to give him no cause to accuse me of being too much of a lady so far as work was concerned. I worked day and night with wretchedness before me. When I lay down beside my child, I felt how much easier it would be to see her die than to see her master beat her about, as I daily saw him beat other little ones. The spirit of the mothers was so crushed by the lash that they stood by without courage to remonstrate. I hate when this is said. I really dislike it. People didn't have courage because they didn't stop the master. They were in a situation where they were overpowered, like wisdom sometimes tells you to wait until a good time. How much more must I suffer before I should be broke in to that degree? I wished to appear as contented as possible. Sometimes I had an opportunity to send a few lines home, and this brought up recollections that made it difficult for a time to seem calm and indifferent to my lot. Notwithstanding my efforts, I saw that Mr. Flint regarded me with a suspicious eye. Ellen broke down under the trials of her new life. Separated from me with no one to look after her, she wandered about and in a few days cried herself sick. One day she sat under the window where I was at work crying, that weary cry which makes a mother's heart bleed. I was obliged to steel myself to bear it. After a while it ceased. I looked out and she was gone. As it was near noon, I ventured to go down in search of her. The great house was raised 2 feet above the ground. I looked under it and saw her about midway, fast asleep. I crept on her and I drew her out, and I held her in my arms. I thought how well it would be for her if she never waked up, and I uttered my thought aloud. I was startled to hear someone say, "Did you speak to me?" I looked up and saw Mr. Flint standing beside me. He said nothing further, but turned frowning away. That night he sent Ellen a biscuit and a cup of sweetened milk. This generosity surprised me. I learned afterwards that in the afternoon he had killed a large snake which crept from under the house, and I suppose that incident had prompted his unusual kindness. So basically, Ellen could have been bitten and killed. The next morning, the old cart was loaded with shingles for town. I put Ellen into it and sent her to her grandmother. Mr. Flint said I ought to have asked his permission. I told him the child was sick and required attention, which I had no time to give. He let it pass, for he was aware that I had accomplished much work in a little time. I'd been there 3 weeks on the plantation when I planned a visit home. It must be at night, after everybody was in bed. I was 6 miles from town, and the road was very dreary. I was to go with a young man who I knew often stole to town to see his mother. The tender affection, right? People not recognizing those things during enslavement. One night when all was quiet, we started. Fear gave speed to our steps, and we were not long in performing the journey. I arrived at my grandmother's. Her bedroom was on the first floor and the window was open, the weather being warm. I spoke to her and she awoke. She let me in and closed the window lest some late passerby should see me. A light was brought and the whole household gathered around me, some smiling and some crying. I went to look at my children and thanked God for their happy sleep. The tears fell as I leaned over them. I moved to leave. Benny stirred. I turned back and whispered, "Mother's here." After digging at his eyes with his little fist, they opened and he sat up in bed looking at me curiously. Having satisfied himself that it was I, he exclaimed, "Oh, Mother, you ain't dead, are you? They didn't cut off your head at the plantation, did they?" My time was soon up. My time was up too soon, and my guide was waiting for me. I laid Benny back into the bed and dried his tears by a promise to come again soon. Rapidly, we retraced our steps back to the plantation. About halfway, we were met by a company of 4 patrols. Luckily, we heard their horses' hoofs before they came in sight, and we had time to hide behind a large tree. They passed, hallooing and shouting in a manner that indicated a recent carousal. How thankful we were that they had not their dogs with them. We hastened our footsteps, and when we arrived on the plantation, we heard the sound of the hand mill. The enslaved were grinding their corn for breakfast. We were safely in the house before the horn summoned them to their labor. I divided my little parcel of food with my guide, knowing he had lost the chance of grinding his corn and must toil all day in the field. Mr. Flint often took an inspection of the house to see that no one was idle. The entire management of the work was trusted to me because he knew nothing about it, and rather than hire a superintendent, he contented himself with my arrangement. He had often urged upon his father the necessity of having me at the plantation to take charge of his affairs and make clothes for the enslaved, but the old man knew him too well to consent to that arrangement because both of them wanted to sleep with the girl. When I had been working a month at the plantation, the great aunt of Mr. Flint came to make him a visit. This was the good old lady who had paid $50 for my grandmother for the purpose of making her free when she stood on the auction block. My grandmother loved this old lady, whom we all called Miss Fanny. She often came to take tea with us. On such occasions, the table was spread with a snow-white cloth, and china cups and silver spoons were taken from the old-fashioned buffet. There were hot muffins, tea, rusks, and delicious sweetmeats. My grandmother kept 2 cows, and the fresh cream was Miss Fanny's delight. She invariably declared that it was the best in town. The old ladies had cozy times together. They would work and chat, and sometimes while talking over old times, their spectacles would get dim with tears and would have to be taken off and wiped. When Miss Fanny bade us goodbye, her bag was filled with my grandmother's best cake, and she was urged to come again soon. So you see these beautiful pictures that Harriet Jacobs is not living the average enslavement, but even so, she's still most discontented with it. No, slavery is good slavery. There had been a time when Dr. Flint's wife came to take tea with us, and when her children were also sent to have a feast of Aunt Marthy's nice cooking. But after I became an object of her jealousy and spite, she was angry with grandmother for giving a shelter to me and my children. She would not even speak to her in the street. This wounded my grandmother's feelings, for she could not retain ill will against the woman whom she had nourished with her milk when a babe. So her grandmother used to feed this ungrateful wretch that can't talk to her. The doctor's wife would gladly have prevented our intercourse with Miss Fanny if she could have done it, but fortunately she was not dependent on the bounty of the Flints. She had enough to be independent, and that is more than can ever be gained from charity, however lavish it may be. Miss Fanny was endeared to me by many recollections, and I rejoiced to see her at the plantation. The warmth of her large, loyal heart made the house seem pleasanter while she was in it. She stayed a week, and I had many talks with her. She said her principal object in coming was to see how I was treated and whether anything could be done for me. She inquired whether she could help me in any way. I told her I believed not. She condoled with me in her own peculiar way, saying she wished that I and all my grandmother's family were at rest in our graves. Even the white woman thinks that death is better than slavery, for not until then should she feel at peace about us. Okay, the good old soul did not dream that I was planning to bestow peace upon her with regard to myself and my children, not by death, but by securing our freedom. So yeah, this is where I'm going to stop. This one was not so heartrending on a psychological level, yes, but there's just these beautiful moments of humanity and finding a sweet spot even in the horrible thing that was enslavement. So thank you so much for listening.